So, hey everybody, this is Stephen Fendley with Microsoft. I'm your Azure specialist. I'm here interviewing Invero today. So I'm going to let Craig and Max introduce themselves. And as you guys do, just tell me what's special about Invero and especially what's special with you guys in regards to Azure Virtual Desktop.
Excellent. Well, I'll start. Craig Slack, CEO and founder of Invero. We're Azure specialized in Microsoft partner, gold partner. We've got 3 advanced specializations in Windows and SQL workloads, app modernization, and most recently in Azure Virtual Desktop, which we're here to talk about today. We do everything from lift and shift migrations, application modernization, data and analytics, pretty much the entire Microsoft Azure platform. So that's enough of a sales pitch on Invero. I'll let Max introduce himself, and we'll get deep into the nitty-gritty.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Max lalivciuc. I am a cloud solution architect in Invero. Pretty much agree with Craig. We cover most of the Microsoft technologies in Azure, and I came from infrastructure background, and for the last 5-7 years, I'm focusing on Microsoft migrations, building the hybrid environments, data migrations, modernizing applications, and data governance, Azure governance, and different Azure technologies. So yeah, and AVD implementation is our cup of tea as well. So we can talk about AVD.
Yeah, well, let's do it. And when Microsoft rolled out Azure Virtual Desktop, I think in some ways it was kind of like, well, hey, it's about time. Microsoft has, the Windows Server technology, the RDS technology. Azure had been around for quite a while at that point. But when we finally did roll it out, I think we finally rolled out something maybe, we did it well. It was an offering in the space that made a lot of sense, but it made a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And one of those is cost. So that's one of the first things that gets people's attention when they start thinking about virtualization in Azure is some of the cost benefits of Azure Virtual Desktop. So why don't we just start there, Max? Why do you think Azure Virtual Desktop is compelling just from a cost perspective?
Well, great question, because everyone cares about the money, right? So AVD, it's an interesting platform, because if you ask a simple question, is that the infrastructure as a service workload inside of its PaaS platform, or it's just a service as a service platform. From my perspective, I will call it a hybrid platform, and we can cover that answer in the future. But the great thing about AVD, the end user utilize as service as a service. However, you don't pay any money for the license cost or user access cost. The cool thing about Azure Virtual Desktop, that you need to worry about 2 things. Basically, your Azure consumption, which is basically your session host running an AVD platform in Azure, compute storage, infrastructure components. And the second component is the license. But in terms of the license, it's very flexible here as well, because you can bring your own M365, Windows 10, 11 license, even the Windows Server calls, and client access list as well, into your AVD environment from your on-prem RDS, for instance, environment. You can enable a hub as well, the Azure Hybrid benefit as well, if organization has EA or software insurance. So you can bring your own licensing, and you can enable a hub, which will reduce the pricing for AVD storage and compute components. So yeah, it's very cost-effective platform. Again, long story short, you don't pay for the service, you pay only for the resources that you consume. So if you're running just one multi-session Windows 10, VM for a couple $100 a month, and 5 people utilizing the VM, and they're using their own licensing of Windows 10, 11, that's all you're gonna pay. You pay a couple $100 for that VM, and that's it. So you can.
So yeah, and just to reiterate that point there, because most of the people, these are managed accounts that are listening to this call. That I work with, and most of them have Microsoft 365, or they have Windows 10 E3, so they have Windows covered in some kind of subscription basis. So in other words, this is a sunk cost for all that licensing cost. You're not even paying for Windows Server or anything like that. It's just a bare bones compute that's there that you mentioned. And then you just alluded to another cost benefit, and that's shared resources while using not Windows Server, but Windows 10 or 11. Will you just explain that benefit there that you kind of hinted at?
Yeah, so inside of the AVD platform, you have the infrastructure component, as I mentioned, the session host running there. So you can apply a different controls and tools, from the cost management perspective, how to reduce your cost for Azure Virtual Desktop. And as I mentioned before, that includes a couple of things. Azure Hybrid Benefit will be a piece of that. If you build or you roll out the POC, the pilot demo environment of the AVD, you can spin up that environment in dev test subscription, which will provide you the better cost as well. In the production scope, I would say you can use reserved instances as well. That will reduce the pricing for the infrastructure components as well. And of course, you can always enable auto scale, auto shutdown. You can spin up a couple automation runbooks for auto start. So all those components, an example, will dramatically reduce the price for the AVD. And you don't pay for that service. You just pay only for the resources that you consume, and you're reusing, if you can, your existing licenses.
Yeah. So the most expensive costs there, the compute, you're saying you can turn off and on with automation. There's some storage cost. There's some, some networking costs there, but that licensing cost, most likely sunk cost for managed accounts if they have Windows 10 covered under the subscription. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And one more important thing, if you compare AVD with your on-prem VDI platform, like traditional remote desktop services you run on-prem, and you need to worry and you need to carry that, the responsibility in maintaining your brokers, licensing, the load balancers, the web, the web access, the management controls. So to support your VDI, RDS on-prem environment, you're in a good position right now if you migrate an AVD, because that's not your responsibility. And moreover, you don't even pay money for that, because Microsoft will cover those underlying components. And again, you're absolutely right. You will just continue paying only for the compute that you compute and storage that you consume, and the remaining underlying infrastructure components that I just described, they're built in AVD platform and covered by Microsoft, managed and covered by the Microsoft.
Yeah, so the management plane cost, that's a great point, because that's all just a PaaS offering, no cost to the customer. It's all on Microsoft's shoulders. And then there's some reduced licensing costs, most likely too, if you're migrating to the modern platform, because you can drop any VDA costs you're paying or any RDS CALs you're paying, and not to mention eliminating Windows Server costs. So we're likely, because there's a sunk cost on the Microsoft 365 or Windows 10 E3, we're likely if you're already having an RDS environment, we're likely reducing licensing costs as well. So not only is it a win from this nimble, consumption standpoint with automation in Azure, but it's a win from a consolidated licensing cost, which is music to everybody's ears, just even for keeping track of that. You could have a sunk cost with M365 and not worry about it. Like, that's music to everybody's ears.
Yeah, so. It's a winning combination in terms of the cost, for sure.
Okay, so cost makes a lot of sense. There's obviously effort in migrating. We'll probably come back to that before we're done here. But another big component of this is security. And if somebody's thinking about Azure and they have stuff on premise today, security is a big concern just for everybody, no matter what we're doing. So talk to us a little bit about this in relation to AVD.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think we can start with the simple things, not only about the AVD platform. Azure is probably the most secure public cloud platform in the world right now. So when you bring your environment, when you build your environment in Azure, that automatically, put in a luxury position that you're utilizing very secure cloud platform. As I mentioned before, AVD has IaaS workloads running inside of the platform, meaning by you continue using your currently security tools and controls in Azure to secure your environment on AVD environment, on AVD platform. So Azure Virtual Desktop, such as different components and services in Azure, does have the integration with Azure Security Center. Previously, it was Defender for the cloud. It does have the integration with the Azure Firewall or Energy, meaning by you can secure your session host with your Azure Firewall. If you require layer 7 security control, You can log your environment using network security groups as well for the layer 4 control. Moreover, access from any operation system. It sounds very great. I say it sounds great, but all people will have a concern. Okay, so I can access my AVD environment from everywhere. How secure is that? But it's very important. It's very important technology that Microsoft handles. It's called Reserve Connect technology. So Microsoft doesn't expose AVD environment externally, meaning by the entire AVD environment will be running inside of the Azure virtual network, and you can manage that additional layer of security, as I mentioned before, with the Azure firewall or network security groups to secure your environment. Additional components very important as well. Azure Active Directory. So you can implement Azure Virtual Desktop with AAD integration, or you can implement it relying on your on-prem Active Directory domain controller running in Azure or running on-prem. So if you integrate with AAD, with Azure Active Directory, you automatically will add additional level of security, such as enabling your multi-factor authentication, start using your conditional access policy, utilizing Microsoft Defender endpoint. So all those components that I just described, they can be applied on AVD environment, such as your traditional service running, the same thing, you can use them on your AVD platform. Yeah, that's pretty much about the security and governance probably.
And we should say too, just with the security as well, like there's a reason a lot of companies with their financial users that are accessing financial services, produce that for their end users with some form of VDI, is because the ability just to control what they're accessing and how they're accessing and all those type of things. It has been a staple of VDI in the first place, as opposed to having, end users and you don't know what they're doing on those end devices. So there's the idea, this concept of an end user, having a virtual environment that they're working in was a more secure idea, from the get-go for companies. And so bringing that into the Azure cloud is only expanding, that benefit, in my opinion. But
absolutely, and security has, a very important piece in Azure, like Azure governance. It's all about the security as well. So once you start using AVD environment, everything will be under your governance. So if you have some IAM, identity access management in place, role-based access in place, you have some naming convention standards. So basically you govern and protect your environment. Everything will be integrating in your AVD platform because it's IaaS workload running underneath. So everything will be applied, and you inherited all your existing components, such as Azure policy. So you want to use Microsoft Azure policy on your AVD platform. Great, it is already there.
Awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to add on the governance piece before we move on?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah. So let's compare features a little bit here, because this is a big one. We have customers out there that'll be watching this that are already using Citrix or VMware or other things. One of the things, Citrix and VMware are very good partners of us here at Microsoft. But one of the things I like about you guys is you can look at this more from a third-party perspective and just say things like they are. So give us some honest feedback here. What are some of the features of AVD? Does it meet the requirements of some of these solutions that have been out on the market for a long time? And what might be some of the benefits of some of the other solutions, or what might be some of the benefits that AVD is doing really great now?
Right. So with all respect to AWS workspaces, Citrix, VMware, Horizon, and different VDI platforms, I truly believe that AVD can compete with them easily. Some of them will have pros and cons for sure, but I will try to highlight, the best features and controls that AVD has and how it can compete with the big guys on the market, speaking of the VDI platforms. So the first one is probably the most important because, once you deploy AVD in the enterprise level organization, user will always say about, okay, what about the user profiles? right? Because now we're in the cloud right now. I might have the hybrid environment right now. I have my traditional file server, maybe with my user profile, and what can I do in Azure? So there is a simple answer for that. Azure provides you a fast logic container technology support on the Azure file. So once you build couple, 100 session hosts, or you need to support couple thousands, couple hundred people, you can implement a fast logic technology on just simply create storage account, create the file share based on the performance and the requirements on the requirements you have for the performance, and you create integration of that fast logic on the Azure files with your AVD platform. It does have a support for two types of integration. You can reuse your on-prem AD and relying on your domain controller, or you can do the integration with fast logic relying on Azure Active Directory. So that's a great proven process using fast logics to.
And in simple terms, tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but FS Logic is essentially containerizing the user profile so that they can be attached as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So instead of using local profiles, roaming profiles on the VM host, because people can jump between a different host, right? As I mentioned before, Azure Broker, Azure Load Balancer will take care when the user will reside. So and you might have the maintenance on the AVD host. So user can jump between different session hosts, especially for the multi-session Windows 10 11 system multi-session pooled. So when you do that, you want basically to carry your user profile. So to do that, there is a great technology provided by Microsoft, I believe, for the couple of decades right now. That's quite old technology in the market right now. That it carries all your user profiles. So think about you have just a big storage located in the same data center. Let's pick a Canada Central right now as your primary center for AVD environment. So you build storage account and Azure file share in Canada Central, and you store your user profiles over there. So when end user, how the end user experience and lifecycle works basically, when the end user will connect to AVD session host, his profile or her profile will be in Azure files, not on the local machine. So that's like the encryption in transit in place automatically in the storage account, data resilience in place, and all the stuff. So, but it's more about the user experience, because you don't create and you don't bring your you don't create basically the roaming profile on that local system. It lives on the storage container. Yes. Mm-hmm. So it does have that integration with the fast logics. The second component control feature of AVD, what I like, compared with the different products, of course, is all about the golden image and support your session host. So I'm getting closer to the Intune right now on Microsoft Endpoint Manager, right? So as I mentioned before, session host is traditional Windows server running, for instance, in your environment. And of course, you can apply a different set of controls, and you can manage that environment, using your traditional GPO, the group policy in your AD, or you can deploy using the autopilot or using the Intune. You can apply different set of policies using your endpoint manager as well. So Azure Virtual Desktop does have integration with the Intune and endpoint manager, which is great. The golden image, as I mentioned before, when you create your AVD environment, of course, you probably would like to minimize the time that you need to implement and deploy your session host inside of the AVD platform. So to do that, you can use Azure Compute Gallery, or simply you can create a golden image and store that inside. And then when you build session host, you deploy from that golden image. So Azure does have the integration with the golden image library, and you can keep and modifying the different versions of your session host and update them, and you can deploy them in AVD host pools. So that one as well. Cross-region support, that's probably the biggest one that I would like to highlight, that Azure Virtual Desktop does have the opportunity to stretch your data between different regions. So globally, I believe Microsoft supports AVD platform in about 60 different Azure regions, meaning if you have a cross-region requirement, if your company or your organization resides in different geography locations, you can use Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop and deploy session hosts across different regions, and which will provide minimum latency between end user and AVD environment running in Azure. So those components probably very important, but from my perspective, one of the probably, the winning combination, as I mentioned before, is going to be the cost effective. So if you will compare right now, again, AVD with different VDI platforms, most of them will have per user, per license, whatever. In Azure, you just pay whatever you consume. So if you don't consume, you don't pay money. So that's probably going to be the big benefit of AVD with the different competitors.
Yeah, and one question we get a lot too, also the difference between AVD and Windows 365. Do you want to field that question real fast? Because I'm sure people are thinking of that as you talk about the difference between AVD and these other platforms.
Yeah, the Windows 365, I would say it is a great fit for small size organizations. When you need to spin up, 5, 10, 20 systems, and you don't need to have that set of controls, governance, security, whatever you have right now in Azure. So it's a best probably fit for the small organizations. Speaking of, medium sizes, big size organizations, enterprise level organizations, for sure, you probably will stick with AVD because, as I mentioned before and provided some details and examples on the security components, the integration, the cost management platform, and all the flavors, probably AVD is going to be the best fit because it's very flexible and scalable. You can use a lot of different technologies to reduce the pricing, to increase the control level, to reduce risks and all the stuff. So it's more mature platform, especially for the big amount of session hosts and end users.
Right. So, the extra work because you have to set up, you have to customize the host pools and all those different pieces of it. But those more controls give you more features. And the big feature with Azure Virtual Desktop is the Windows 10 multi-session. That's not yet available on the Windows 365. So the only way to do that shared resources that was typically available on the Windows Server is to use Azure Virtual Desktop. And Azure is the only place, Azure and Azure Stack are the only place that you can do the Windows 10 multi-session. So your own individual session using a shared VM on the back end. Whereas if you want that Windows 10 or Windows 11 on, say, AWS, you're going to have to do a full VM per user. And so it's going to be dramatically more expensive and waste resources in that manner. So
correct.
Okay.
Oh
yeah.
One more quick feature because we recently got the request from the client. They have the department with AutoCAD, Autodesk users. And the request was about, can you provide GPU support on AVD platform? So the answer is yes, because Azure does have that integration. Again, you build your IaaS workload, the session host, just from the market. So you can pick any size that you think is applicable for the scope of the project. So in a GPU support request, you can utilize NVV4, I believe, series of SKU of the VM when you build. It does have the integration with AMD and NVIDIA graphic adapters, and it's very easy to install. You literally need to install drivers and VM extension on the AVD host, and it does have that integration with GPU. So you literally can provision a GPU supportable VM to the end user without provisioning or buying a brand new expensive platform workstation for the user. If you can use, and of course you can continue using the multi-session Windows 10, 11 to be more efficient, right? Because you can have up to like 5, 10 people in the same time running the same platform, the same system. So you can build a heavy VM with GPU support, and some people will use it in the same time. So that's probably, again, good positive feedback about the cost management and how efficient use your environment.
Yeah, not having to hang on and maintain that expensive hardware over long periods of time is just a huge benefit. Turning it off and on as needed. In the long run, there's a million different scenarios where that pays off very quickly. So yeah, that's great. That's a great example. So let's talk about effort in migrating then. This is one of the areas where you guys in particular bring some of this expertise. You guys have done it many times. You bring those learnings to the table. How is just working with Invero make coming to AVD easier?
Right. So we've done, handful amount of migrations and build AVD platform from the scratch in Azure. You decide, each case will be probably a different one, because some people will prefer building a brand new environment AVD platform in Azure. As I mentioned before, probably I should mention that, in the beginning, probably the most important is of AVD platform is very easy and simple to deploy. So that's very important, because people don't bring new skills when they build, when they can support the AVD platform. So again, if you have a request to start using AVD platform, you basically have two options. You can build environment from the scratch. You will need to build the host pools, and you will need to install the application stack on that host pool, and store it in the Compute Azure Gallery as a golden image and redeploy in the future in the session host. Or you can move and migrate your existing environment from the RDS. If you're running Hyper-V, if you're running the VMware, you can convert your disk, you can back it up the platform, and you can bring them and again add it to the gallery and spin up the session host from that custom image. Prep before. Some people will use AVD platform with a combination of migration existing workloads for the back-end environment. So I will give you the example. Then Dynamics platform. Some people still continue using on-prem Dynamics environment, and they're utilizing right now Citrix or RDS environment to publish the Dynamics application to the end users. So probably in the combination of the integration or changing that platform from RDS VDI to the Azure Virtual Desktop, it's reasonable to bring the back-end components of the Dynamics into the Azure, right? Because probably it's going to be not reasonable if you want to build AVD environment in Azure, but still keeping your in a back-end components, Dynamics platform, database, web application server in your data center. So again, each request can be completely different. Use case scenario can be completely different, but for sure we've done the different deployments, and I believe the delivery was amazing.
Yeah, and for any of our managed accounts watching this, if you want to meet with Invero, I can set it up for you. Would love to make that introduction. We have some really aggressive funding around Azure Virtual Desktop. I'd love to talk to you about that. We have to apply and get approved. Invero is part of those programs. And but I've seen lots, depending on use case, I've seen lots of POCs and implementations and other things get funded by Microsoft, because this is new technology. There's a lot of people interested in it, and Microsoft's trying to invest in people getting on the platform. So it is a great time, if you're interested at all, to have those conversations and see if we can work something out that makes everybody happy. And with that being said, Max or Craig, is there any just final thoughts you want to say to our managed accounts on the topic?
Yeah, I probably will say that AVD platform is a great fit for everyone, for the existing clients and the organization with the Azure footprint and presence currently, and for the brand new users as well, because we've got a couple of requests. People ask me, hey, we try to be the cloud-only company, and do I need to build my domain controller? What do I need to build? What infrastructure components we need to build to start using AVD platform? And surprisingly, the answer right now is almost nothing, because once you build your tenant, once you build your subscription, you have the root management, which is your Azure Active Directory, identity provider, and you can rely on Azure Active Directory to build your AVD platform. As I mentioned before, it does have integration with FSLogix. As I mentioned before, you can integrate and domain join using your AAD. So it's a great platform for both scenarios, when you build a hybrid environment, still relying on your on-prem domain controller, or when you build, the cloud-only environment ecosystem and you want to utilize only cloud components and you don't want to bring any traditional on-prem data center infrastructure components, yes, it's fully supported in both directions. So that's actually one benefit as well.
Yeah, and then Craig, I'll just ask you one last question before we finish here. And we've gotten some of the most positive feedback for Invero that I've received this year. Customers have enjoyed working with you guys. Like, what is it that you guys bring to the table, just from a customer experience working with a Microsoft partner? Like, why is it that I'm getting good reports from the field?
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Stephen. That's good to hear always reports, and repeat business from existing customers gets us that as well. We know that customers keep coming back to us for more assistance. They turn to us as their trusted advisor, as cliche as that may be. But anything to do with Azure, they're calling us first, and then it kind of extends beyond that. They're like, okay, anything to do with Microsoft, right? So we like that. But to answer the customer experience side of things, it really comes down to our customer-focused approach. We put ourselves in the customer's shoes. What is the business reasons why they are coming to us? It's not about the technology for technology's sake. It's about understanding what is the business problem that the CIO is trying to solve, or the systems administrator who's having to administer the data center, and what are they trying to address? Whether it's freeing up capital to invest elsewhere in the business, or is it reducing costs, getting out of the data center business? There's many different facets, many different reasons why a client may want to migrate to the cloud, or they're already in the cloud and they want some help in governing it, optimizing it, what have you. So to me, I think it's just, we've been in the cloud space for now 12 years, since 2010. Myself especially have been focused on cloud, and we decided in 2016 to focus entirely on Azure, and that was that's our core competency. We don't do AWS, we don't do GCP, and I think because of that, we've been able to go very deep and wide on the Azure platform instead of very, very thin and narrow. So
yeah, and just to be super candid, when I asked some of the customers, why Invero, it basically came down to the fact that you guys listened. They didn't feel like they were stuck in the cog and the machine, and just getting the stereotypical answers. But you guys were really listening. You guys were walking the walk. You were really listening to what they needed. And so, you're the CEO of the company. If they need to get a hold of you, they can get a hold of you, and things like that. So it's been a good experience. So I do encourage any of our managed Microsoft accounts listening. I'd love to make the introduction. We'd love to talk AVD. There's tons of resources. If you're thinking about it at all, let's join forces and see what we can do. So, well, thank you, Invero, for coming on, and thanks everybody
for
watching.
the opportunity, Stephen. Much appreciated.
Yep.
Yes.